That we are good to go. So we'll start off with introducing folks. Tonight we're going to try and cover some information relative to chronic wasting disease issues in Western Kentucky. Tonight we have Dr. John Hast and Gabriel Jenkins with the Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources to kind of go over some of the rules and regulations that have gone into effect and information on why they have gone into effect and what we're hoping to accomplish as a state agency to hopefully quickly detect CWD if it is present within the state or confirm that there's a low likelihood it is, and make sure that management implications and strategies go in place as soon as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn over the program to them, and we will have a question and answer period towards the end after they have done their talk. So please hold your questions till then. We'll make sure everyone has an opportunity to do that. With that, guys, I'm going to hand over control and turn off my video and mic.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. I guess I'll just kind of jump in and start off the beginning part of it. So thanks for the introduction. My name is Gabe Jenkins. I'm the Acting Information and Education Division Director. I'm the lead for our chronic wasting disease response. I've spoken to many of y'all before, I'm sure, over the past. Spent many years in the deer and elk program, worked on CWD, worked on deer. Spoke to the agents back 4 or 5 years ago on how to deal with deer damage. So familiar faces, and kind of here to talk about CWD. Also have with us Dr. John Hast. I'm going to be giving the presentation part of it, and then John's going to be sharing some resources that we have online for you guys to be able to see and send to the public. So with that, what I'd like to do is just jump right in, kind of cover tonight on what chronic wasting disease is, why we care about it, some human health concerns, and then kind of bring it into Kentucky and then specifically in Western Kentucky and kind of what all we're doing, what all the fuss is about this year. So with that, let me share my screen here real quick. So I have our contact information here for both myself and John. On the last slide, I will share that as well. And so you feel free to reach out, send us an email, call. We'll be covering a lot of information. We're here to answer your questions at the end as well. So anything we can do to inform you, to educate you, you guys are on the front lines. And many of y'all are in these counties that we're going to talk about. So we want to make sure that we get the right information to you. So we're going to start real basic. So what is chronic wasting disease, or CWD? You're going to hear me use that acronym back and forth multiple times, CWD or chronic wasting disease. It's a transmissible neurological disease of cervids. Cervids are members of the deer family. So deer, white-tailed deer, mule deer, black-tailed deer, elk, moose, and caribou. And CWD is essentially a contagious brain disease that creates holes in the brain, similar to a sponge. So if you look at this photo at the top, this will be a slide of a normal brain tissue, what that cross section looks like underneath a microscope. And then below here is a slide of a brain with chronic wasting disease. And you see these large holes in the brain. And that's essentially in the late onset of the disease, what happens. With CWD, it's always fatal. And there is no vaccine or treatment for it. So it's one that we care a lot about, because once you're exposed, there's nothing we can do for you. So we kind of start at the basics. What causes CWD? It's a prion protein. So kind of take it back to basic biology, high school biology. What is a protein? Proteins are large, complex molecules that play critical roles in the body. Made up of hundreds of thousands of smaller units called amino acids. Proteins can serve many different functions. They can be antibodies, enzymes, they can send messages, they provide support and storage all in the body. The weird thing about proteins is they're not alive. You can't kill them, and just the body just breaks them down over time. So what is a prion or prion protein? When a prion is being made, for some reason, when that protein is being made by the brain, it's misfolded and called a prion protein, or a lot of people kind of refer to it as a rogue protein. For some reason, when the brain makes it, it's made wrong. And that protein stops functioning like the normal proteins do in the body, and the body doesn't know what to do with it and how to break it down. And then their interaction, that rogue protein, when they interact with other proteins, it causes those proteins that they interact with to misfold, creating an accumulation of prion proteins. So kind of complex, and really I try to break it down with this analogy. These prion proteins, these are sending messages. So they're in the central nervous system. And we'll think of it this way. Each protein is like a paper airplane. For some reason, when that brain is making paper airplanes over and over, the brain makes one that's wrong, and it's made a ball. And so you interject that ball into the stream of paper airplanes, sending messages back and forth. And that ball bumps into other paper airplanes and causes those paper airplanes to crumple, creating more balls. And then as they are passed up and down the central nervous system, it gets ultimately to the brain. The brain doesn't know what to do with the ball because they're used to getting airplanes, and it kicks it off to the side, wasting away, creating holes in the brain. So that's about the best way that I've ever heard of somebody explaining what this looks like with the planes and ball analogy. So CWD, it's a species-specific disease of the deer family, but there are some other diseases in this suite of diseases that many of you all are probably familiar with. There's animal forms and there's human forms. In animals, it's scrapie that affects specifically sheep and goats. There's mad cow. Many of you all are familiar with mad cow. And then there's a mink form. And then in humans, there's a Crutchfield-Jacobs disease that comes that way. There's Kuru. That was a variant that people got. And then there's a Crutchfield-Jacob disease that's a variant from people who ate mad cow. So back in the early 2000s, there was a bunch of cattle that succumbed or ultimately became sick with mad cow, and that beef went into the food system in Great Britain. And by consuming beef, people in Great Britain actually came down with mad cow essentially from that. So that's the only known source or known time that it has jumped the species barrier there in the early 2000s. So with other human health concerns besides the mad cow variant, there's never jumped the species barrier. Right now, there's no reported cases of chronic wasting disease infection in people. The public health continue to assess the risk of CWD transmission in humans. And really what we're here to tell you is if you hunt in an area that has a risk of CWD, what we really want you to do is get that animal tested. That way that you are informed, you know what the status of that animal is before you eat it. We don't want to be in the game of eating diseased animals. We know that this disease can't be killed. So no matter how high you cook it or how hot it gets, you can't kill it. So why it's important to get it tested. So transmission, how does it transmit from animal to animal or across the landscape? We're learning about this. Research takes time, but we know that animal to animal transmission is the most important in facilitating disease. It can both be direct from animal to animal or indirect. Also, the more animals you have in one spot or in one area, the more it transmit, just the density side of it. And then artificial feeding. So the more you congregate animals to one spot, if you get an animal that's sick, all of them can pick it up that way. So, you think of just anything with any other diseases, put it in human aspects right now, especially with COVID, we understand this. and trying to spread them out as much as possible. The crazy thing about CWD is those infectious proteins actually stay in the environment. So they can be on the soil, they can be taken up into the plants, and then an animal, a deer or an elk that comes along could eat that plant or eat some of that dirt and actually contract CWD. And then lastly, it has a very long incubation time. So from the time the animal was exposed until the animal actually starts exhibiting symptoms of the disease can be anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years. So, many times you look at an animal and they look perfectly healthy and fine, even though they have chronic wasting disease, which makes it really hard to try to detect. So bringing it, kind of focusing in a little bit more from the big disease to painting the picture of where we are here in Kentucky. CWD has been detected in 26 states, so over half the country. 6 of our 7 border states have it, with the exception being Indiana. It's in 4 Canadian provinces. It's also in Norway and South Korea. And really, when you look at Norway and South Korea, it kind of makes you scratch your head and wonder how in the world did it get there. And that's directly related to the movement of captive animals, where they shipped North American deer, North American elk to Norway and South Korea, and to South Korea and got it there. Norway, I misspoke. Those are reindeer in Norway that have them, and still not sure. It just was detected in the last year or two, so still not sure what the cause of that there is. But when you look at CWD in the last decade, it has dramatically increased, especially in the East, all over the East. Tennessee found it in 2018. Ohio found it in about that time. So, Missouri's been about 2014. So really it's kind of surrounded us in the last decade. So for us in Kentucky, we've been working on chronic wasting disease since 2002. This is just a heat map we've been testing that entire time. We've tested a little bit over 32,000 deer and elk. Most of those are deer, but we've tested samples all across the state in that almost 20-year period. We have a chronic wasting disease plan. We've had that plan since we started testing in 2002. It's really a living, breathing document that we change all the time. It can be found on our website. We modify that, we change that based upon new science and new guidance and information that comes out from other states and from peer-reviewed research. For us, we want it to be out there. We talk a lot about it and want people to see kind of the steps that we would do. The entire plan is essentially based on us to give us guidance for our first year or first objective on where the disease is, and then what we would do in that response. For us, what we want to do is try to use hunters as much as possible to collect samples. All of these things inside the plan are increased testing, which requires increased sample collection. And so we want to use hunters as our partner in this effort to get those samples. And then really this plan, like I said, is only good for the first year because it tells us what we're going to do initially. And then after year 1, we will essentially have to reassess, adapt based upon what we found, and then make a strategy going forward. So our CWD response plan is that it is a response plan. It is not a management plan. It's really just a guide for us to use in year 1. So in that plan, it kicks off in essentially 3 different ways. If a wild deer or elk is found to be positive with chronic wasting disease, the plan kicks in. If a captive deer, captive cervid, there's multiple captive cervid facilities within the state, we co-regulate captive deer farms with the Department of Agriculture. So we work together with our sister agency to work on this, and that will be a co-response between the two. And then third, if a neighboring state finds a positive in the wild, or within the captive, within close proximity of our border, that would kick into action at that point. So for us, and Dr. Springer alluded to this at the beginning, the top priority for us is to try to prevent disease spread. If we have it, we want to find it early and slow its spread. There's not been a lot, but there's been a few cases in the country where they have found the disease early, and they've been able to significantly reduce its spread, or in one case, completely eliminate it. So that's what we hope to do if we detect the disease. We'll call for enhanced surveillance if it's in the captive side of things. We'll also work with Department of Agriculture to hopefully eradicate that facility or greatly reduce the population inside that captive farm to see if there are any more positives. If it's in the wild, we'll have an enhanced surveillance where we'll both be targeted and active. So meaning where we're going to be focused, where we're going to try to collect those, and then active with our hunters, active to try to get as many samples as we can. We would implement things like a feeding and baiting ban, carcass movement restrictions. And really what we're trying to do is contain that disease where it is and slow its spread. So, why we care, we talked about this already, that, it's not something as of right now that's a human risk, but it's always fatal, and there's not a way to cure that. So, that long-term is going to impact our deer population and elk population in the state. Both of those resources are extremely valuable to us here in Kentucky. Deer hunting has an annual economic impact of $550 million. So, that's hunting sales, that's clothing, ammunition, firearms, lodging, gas, corn, and things that people use for bait. So a lot of different things that go into that affects all Kentuckians here. And even our little old elk herd in Eastern Kentucky, it provides an annual economic impact of a little bit more than $3 million to our folks in Eastern Kentucky. So both of those together, we're talking millions of dollars. So it's extremely important for everybody, both as a activity and pastime and things they enjoy, but also financially. And so, if CWD was detected, it's not uncommon to see a reduction in participation by 10% the first year. And so that, when you look at 10%, that's a little bit more than $55 million in annual net loss that we could experience just in 1 year across the state. So it's big business and big money for us, for everybody. So kind of why we're all here, unfortunately, is that in early September, we had to enact our CWD response plan. We got word from our sister agency in Tennessee that they had tested a deer that was positive for CWD. It was an adult 3.5-year-old female deer located in Henry County. Henry County is the very northwestern corner of Tennessee. The unfortunate part of this is the deer was exhibiting symptoms consistent with CWD. So she had the disease. She'd been, so she'd been exposed and contracted the disease and living with it for a long time. That deer specifically was 7.8 miles south of our Kentucky border, right there in Callaway County. And because it was detected so close to our border, when we enacted our response plan, and we enacted it based upon just like we had found a deer that was positive within the state. So this is a map of Tennessee, Henry County right here, just to kind of get your bearings. Just to the east is going to be land between the lakes. If you look to the southwest corner in Tennessee, they had Fayette and Hardeman County. That is their CWD zone. That's going to be just east of Memphis, where they detected CWD in 2018 and kind of really focused there. And then this one in Henry County, they weren't expecting to find it. So it's a surprise to them, unfortunately us as well. Tennessee is going to be doing a lot more testing and increased sampling over the next couple months. And as we progress this year, we'll learn more on what Tennessee looks like in the herd there in Tennessee and Henry and Weakley counties. So for us, as much as we would like to build the Great Wall of China between us and Tennessee, that's just not feasible. So what we had to do is enact our CWD response plan. And we established a disease surveillance area. What we did is this, the positive here in Henry County, Tennessee, we put a 30-mile buffer around that positive, and every county that buffer fell into, we designated those counties as our surveillance area for 2021. So those 5 counties are Hickman, Fulton, Graves, Marshall, and Callaway counties. We immediately at that point put in the following restrictions for everybody that hunts and lives in these counties for this season. So automatically we implemented a baiting and feeding ban. So we're going to prohibit the baiting and feeding of all wildlife, specifically with the use of grain, salt, or mineral, essentially anything that's intended to be eaten. We want to clarify that still normal agricultural practices are still going to be allowed. So food plots, your cover crops, your ag plantings, all of those things are still good. For our farmers, if you have a cattle operation, those mineral blocks that you're putting out for your cows, that's still allowable. And then also for our folks that live in towns or the feed birds, we're still going to allow bird feeders within the maintained area of your home. And then trapping, if you're a trapper, you can use scents and attractants, but you can't use bait or salt or minerals for an attractant for any type of fur bearer trapping. Then also carcass tagging. So if you harvest the deer, you have to affix a carcass tag to this animal. It has to be clearly visible when you're transporting it, and it has to be attached to that carcass. I have an example here. We have some of these on our website. There's a handful of things you have to have on that carcass tag. You can make your own, or you can use our example. If you do make your own, you have to write the species of the animal and the sex of it, the county and state of origin, the day you harvested it, or when you actually obtained it. So if somebody gave it to you, the hunter's name, phone number, and address. And then if you're in possession of it and you didn't harvest that, your name and phone number. And then lastly, the telecheck or confirmation number that showed that animal has been checked per our requirements. So the big thing that impacts essentially everybody, and one that's coming up on us, is we are establishing mandatory check stations for all of essentially the firearms seasons in the state. So that would be our early muzzleloader season, which we have already had. That was October 16th and 17th. The big one coming up, our modern gun season, starting November the 13th and running through the 28th. And then our late muzzleloader season in December the 11th through the 19th. So we have 17 check stations. You can see all of those in this map. They're indicated by the little black dots and the station number. When we set these and created these, we wanted to be as accessible for everybody as we could. So everybody who hunts in these counties should have less than a 10-mile drive to come to all of our check stations. They're in high traffic areas and places that we should be able to accommodate everybody and move them in. So what you'll need to bring if you harvest that deer, you will need to either bring the entire carcass. And by all means, if you do bring the entire carcass, please go ahead and field dress that animal. We don't need the intestines or any of the inside of the guts. And then if you want to go ahead and telecheck it, you can do so. And then if you have the abilities, you can just bring the head. So if that's something that you would like to do, just cut off a little bit of the neck meat in the head. You can bring that to us as well. So we'll take either the entire carcass or the head. And then transportation. So if you are transporting an animal, we're restricting the movement of those carcasses in the disease surveillance zone. So entire carcasses of the deer, they cannot go out of the surveillance zone. Any type of unclean skull, bone, or spinal column, they have to stay within the surveillance zone. If you want to take them out of those 5 counties, you essentially have to clean them and take all the bones off. So clean skulls, clean teeth, completely deboned meat, finished taxidermy, hide, antlers, and then a clean skull plate. Wrapping up here, everybody. So I know how can you help to help us with all of these things? You know, what we ask people to do is educate people about CWD, kind of why we're here tonight. Share our website. John's going to go over a lot of things here in a little bit, and then help spread the word about CWD on your social media channels, and then continue to deer hunt just like you have. And we want people to go and do like they always have, and just come out and come to our check stations. If you're interested in coming and wanting to help, if you're with UK or any of the folks that are here and want to help us at our check stations, we're looking for volunteers. It's going to be a lot of days and a lot of people. We're going to run those check stations from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. However, in the evenings, if it's 8 p.m. and we still have people in line, we're going to work until everybody gets through the line every night. So we're going to be very busy. We average about 5,000 deer that are harvested in those 5 counties during modern gun season. So we're going to have a lot of folks coming through, and it'll be a great way to interact with the members of your counties and the hunters, and so hopefully see some great deer. So with that, instead of questions, I'll kick it over to John and let him share some of the resources that we have on our website.
You're muted, John.
Yeah, I'll start over on that. So I got to give credit where credit is due. So Gabe and our communication staff and our IT staff have worked tirelessly to improve and constantly update our website and really make it, the clearinghouse for information for CWD. Most of the people that I interact with that have questions, I usually send them this link and the problem solved, and they've got the answer that they need. So really on the front page of our website, and it's easy, fw.ky.gov. You don't really have to go very far to get to the CWD section of it. It's pretty much front and center on our webpage at this point. So we've got this sick deer icon, and this is really kind of the portal into our CWD information. So we'll go there real quick and just kind of work through a couple of things that I think will be useful, especially for y'all answering questions when they come in. So as we scroll down, let's see, taking a minute to load. We've got a number of kind of these tiles that pop up at the top, and we'll kind of work through some of those. One thing I wanted to hit is really what I feel like, and Gabe had this map in his presentation. I've actually used this map to sort of sum up the situation that we're in. I think people have a hard time, visualizing that, yeah, it's less than 8 miles away from our border, and that matters. It's not here yet, but that matters that it's right there on the doorstep. So one thing that I wanted to bring up, just because it's on this page and it's kind of different than what we've talked about thus far with the mandatory stations. For anybody that's watching out in the rest of the state, we've got a system in place for hunters to get their deer tested. There are, we're certainly raising concern with what we're doing in West Kentucky. The number of calls about people concerned about their deer has increased this fall. We've got a system of freezers in place across the state. There's not very many of them. This is a young project that we hope to expand on for many years. I mean, maybe a freezer per county is not out of the question several years from now, as an avenue that a concerned hunter can drop off that deer head and get a test back from us. So that's kind of what this map depicts. As you can see, this is our surveillance zone down here in the western corner. We already had 5 freezers in those counties. They're getting used. And then we've got addresses for these. So if you've got somebody out there across the state that's, maybe in the same county as one of these freezers, that's their best avenue for getting a deer tested. It's not required, but it gives that hunter an option for getting a CWD test if they are concerned about consuming that deer, which is understandable. So one thing, and this will kind of segue from the freezer into kind of our mandatory check stations. We've got a link here for the CWD lookup, and this is something that we didn't touch on very much earlier, but whether you come to a mandatory station or you take a deer to these freezers, you'll basically leave with a little receipt with a 4 or 5 digit number. And this is sort of the portal to look up those results. One thing that we're telling people as we go, there's probably about a 6-week turnaround time on these tests right now. That'll speed up a little bit as we start cranking them out during modern gun season, but it's roughly a 6-week time lag. So for me, if I kill a deer outside the surveillance zone opening day, I can process that deer, put it up like I normally do, drop the head in a freezer, and expect to test back in a fairly timely fashion. I don't get to eat my deer right away, but to ensure that it's CWD free, that is an option. Package it like you normally would, simply put it in the deep freeze like always, and check back, punch your number in, and you'll get your test result when that comes back. So like I said, things should speed up as kind of the quantity of deer increase here next weekend. But this first page just kind of goes through some stuff that Gabe has talked about. Talks about import restrictions from other states, which is important for anybody that's taking a Western trip. But if we'll jump back up here to the top real quick and go back to these tiles, specific to the surveillance zone. So again, Marshall, Callaway, Graves, Hickman, and Fulton. Basically everything you need to know is on this page. So as we work through it, again, we've got a bigger version of that map. We've got a list of our special restrictions in the CWD zone, and then a detailed map of our check stations. And as Gabe mentioned, this is something we tried to make as simple as possible. We've got these in highly trafficked areas. They're at most of the major processors, at a few of the, the high volume taxidermists. We've got them in proximity to kind of your exits from Western Kentucky up there near I-24 and down there by the Egners Ferry Bridge crossing Kentucky Lake. We just want to make this process as easy as possible. So really what I'm suggesting to hunters when I talk to them is kind of figure this out, next week before the hunt starts. Figure out what your plan is for getting that deer to one of these stations. As Gabe mentioned, all we really need is the head. If you've telechecked it, if somebody's hanging a doe in the barn and it's hung, simply cut that head off and, you can put it in a Walmart sack and bring it to us. That's really the easiest option to get us the head. Secondly, somebody that's doing a European mount that wants that buck head back, bring it by, we'll pull what we need. You can have that head back immediately. And then kind of the third scenario is a buck going to a taxidermist. Come by the check station. We're going to put one of our CWD tags around the antlers, take down that taxidermist info, and then essentially your deer's checked, and it will be on Kentucky Fish and Wildlife to follow up with that taxidermist. Most of the taxidermists in this area we've got a relationship with. They know what to expect. They're going to understand what that tag means, and that hunter will be legal. They can go about their business, and we'll get that sample and put it into the database. One thing on test results. So if you're taking a deer to a processor or taking a deer to a taxidermist, we might not have that 6-week turnaround. So we're kind of at the mercy of when, those two entities get those deer processed, get them taxidermied, and allow us to get that sample. So that may slow it down just a little bit, but I still think 6 weeks is a pretty good turnaround. Just below the map of check stations, we actually, during our muzzleloader weekend, early muzzleloader, it was the first weekend we actually had these check stations running. Kentucky Afield came down and shot a great video. I won't toot my horn too much, but they somehow talked me into starring in this video. Either way, if I don't scare you off, it's a good video of kind of understanding what to expect. Very friendly atmosphere. The staff's very professional. We'll get you in and out. I think the one on these videos, the two hunters that came in with a deer, they were in and out in 5 minutes probably. So a pretty slick process. And just, check out that video, just kind of get an idea of what to expect. We also go into the Carcass Tags that Gabe talked about, and we've got Chad Miles with Kentucky Afield doing a Carcass Tag explanation, which is just a great kind of overview of the reasons why we had to put that in place. And then down here at the very bottom, if you really want to get into it, we've got Gabe and Dr. Christine Casey, our wildlife veterinarian, basically did a sort of a call-in style show with Kentucky Afield where they just run through a laundry list of questions and give some great answers on that. So I covered the test results lookup, and that's pretty well linked at the top of just about any CWD page you come to. That'll be important after the season's over, and we've got a lot of hunters with a card in their hand with a number on it. That's kind of the portal to looking up those results. Really, the last thing that I want to hit is our frequently asked questions. This is a document that we've been working on since day one, and it gets updated probably weekly when a new question comes in that we think is relevant to add to this. Just it's a good long page with some links in it talking about, the big questions, the main questions that we get on CWD. So it's got a link to our response plan. It's got a link to the surveillance stuff again. So just a good clearinghouse for some information. A lot of the extension agents down there, at least in the surveillance zone, we've got an addendum to our hunting guide. So if we go back to the main page, the hunting guide that you picked up in July or August prior to the Tennessee detection won't have these extra regulations in them. So right here on our front page, you can see this is updated with CWD regs. And we've also had a number of the FAQs printed out that we've spread across the zone. They've gone to a lot of our licensed sales folks. I think we managed to get some in a couple ag extensions agent offices down there while we were working. So again, what really has helped me with taking a number of phone calls from concerned hunters is pointing them to the web page. A lot of folks, I'll sit here and kind of walk them through, and then they get they can see right there that their questions are lined out, and kind of it naturally takes it from there. But so with that, again, I would encourage, if any of you have questions, please call up here. We're happy to talk to you. We've got 6 or 8 people sitting in the office every day that can give you the information that you need. If a question comes up, and I'll admit that at least once a week, there's a question that I've never even thought about that comes across. And certainly if we get stumped, we'll work it out and get you an answer. Let's see. So I'll jump. Matt said, take it to questions. So we can do that if we've got any.
See, so we got one question here. I can read it if you want me to, Ben. And from Adam Huber, he wants to know, what methods did those states use to eradicate the disease? So the one state that's been able to eradicate it was the state of New York. They found it in the early 2000s in both a captive facility and in the wild. They did a very targeted effort and some targeted removals right there around it, and then increased their sampling effort. And it looked like they essentially found it at the very beginning, and they've tested really hard since, and they've not picked it up. So I don't know what they did special per se, but they for sure found it early, it's been 15, 16 years, and they've not found it since. So I think for us, it's the key of early detection, and then removing a handful of deer there close to that positive area seemed to work for them.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. Ben asked the question, could he look up results from last year? And actually gave me his number. Yeah.
If you want to show that, that can show them what that database looks like.
I can do that.
While you're doing that, I'll hit y'all with some questions that I've kind of picked up on either in some of the Facebook groups I'm on or different people I've talked to. One in particular, the area that we have in Kentucky, in Fulton County, called Kentucky Bend. It's no way connected to Kentucky. Hunters that are in that area, what do they need to do? Because there's no check station down there in that area.
Yeah, I can certainly jump in on that one. So what we did for muzzleloader season, and we were it was one of those things that I feel bad about Kentucky Bend down there because it didn't make it on our initial map. we had trimmed it down. I said, there's a little piece down here that we might have to think about. But what we're going to have, and it's essentially, and I've got a picture of the barrel on my phone, but when you come north out of Tennessee into Kentucky Bend, there's a house or two right there, and it's basically your first telephone pole up the road. There will be a blue 55-gallon drum sitting there with basically everything you need to drop your head off. If it's a head that doe head or something like that, we're going to handle that just like we do our freezer drop off places. You get a receipt, have the number, leave your head, you're good to go. I've also got my phone number on that barrel. So if we get a situation where somebody's not sure, feel free to dial that phone number and it'll go right to me, and we can work on a solution. Whether we've got to send staff over there to take a sample or kind of whatever the scenario might be, we'll get that situated. That is a very unique situation in that you can't legally get to one of our check stations with an intact harvested deer that you take out on the bend there, and we'll work through that as needed.
So just kind of follow up with that if you don't care, Ben. So the issue is Tennessee has a similar regulation as we do, is you can't take in the entire carcass into Tennessee. So that's what the issue there is on the bend. Conversely, we also have some issues on the islands in the Mississippi River. So when you look at those islands, a lot of them actually are part of the mainland of Missouri, but which is a little slough intermixed. And there's not a way for people, they're walking across Missouri, across a little footbridge and coming into these islands. And so they have a similar issue where they can't get to us. However, in Missouri, they have told us that if you are not traveling through the state of Missouri and it's on your final destination is Kentucky, that you can take that carcass through Missouri. So if we have anybody who's here that hunts on the islands in the Mississippi River, you can harvest that deer, load it in your truck, put the carcass tag on it, drive through the state of Missouri, back into Kentucky, and come to a check station.
That's a real good point. I mean, there's several in Fulton County that go over there for that.
Yep.
There's another one in the chat. Do y'all see that? I'll get it for you. If you have a cornfield that is planted for wildlife and bush hog it down, would that be considered baiting under the current regulations?
So no, that would not be. It's not baiting.
Then, sorry guys, I just got done cleaning up our training downstairs, but Adam, who had asked that last question there, also, I don't know if you guys saw this, could you elaborate on the methods used by the states that actually had success in eradicating the disease?
Yeah, we touched on that a little earlier, so we got that one.
Good.
Yep.
Just wanted to make sure. Sorry.
One other that had kind of come up, well, which you kind of covered this in the presentation. A lot of people have asked why do the restrictions on the minerals? And then the other thing that people had asked was in the future, if we do not find CWD this year, next year, whenever, do you think these restrictions in this surveillance area will be lifted?
So are we good on the minerals? Do you want me to touch on that anymore? You think that's?
I think we pretty much have kind of covered that. If they're at this point in the video, we've kind of covered that point. If you want to touch on, if we're going to look at in the future lifting any of these restrictions.
So for us, the first year is we really wanted to kind of cast a broad net of samples. It was close to Kentucky, but with that fragmented landscape in that part of the state, especially when you take the corn and beans off, it's very fragmented on the deer habitat. So they could really scatter in multiple different ways based upon that positive detection in Tennessee. And the fact that doe had the disease and she was exhibiting symptoms means she's been on the landscape for a while. So it kind of tells us there are probably more deer that are out there that are positive in Tennessee. So we really wanted to look in a very broad area. As you get closer to the border, your chances definitely increase. So for us, thinking about it, I'd love to be able to come back in a couple of years and we've sampled a whole lot of deer and not found it. That's the goal. That's what we want to try to hopefully find, is that we've not found it. But also I'm going to be a little bit of a realist and realize if it's 7 miles from our border, it's just a matter of time. It just might be at a very, very low prevalence. And, for us, if and when we find it, we want to try to focus. We realize that a lot of these restrictions can be burdensome to our hunters. So I think we will definitely modify and change through time. But what that looks like, I don't know. One thing that we have to remember is we make recommendations as far as the biologists go with the agency. We have a board, our commission board, who basically codify those recommendations. So we take things to them, and then they vote on them and then pass those regulations. So what we would do or what we would pull back on, it's essentially hypothetical at this point. We would need their blessing, the commissioner's blessing, to do anything different than what we're doing right now. And then that would allow for public input and the ways for our public to reach out to their commissioners and have open dialogue into the future when we make any changes.
All right, thank you. And one last one. I know Matt, he may want to throw his publications up here in a minute. Deer that are harvested during archery, any other time during the year, do those animals have to be checked through one of the freezer sections, from one of the freezer drops?
No, they don't. No, there's the only time you got to take them is during those gun seasons. And then I'll say, if you're concerned about it and you want to get it tested, John talked about those freezer collection stations. You could take it to one of those and drop off the head there, and we can get the sample. But no, you only have to come to us during those season dates. So I will say that if you during modern gun season, you take out a bow or a crossbow and you shoot a deer, you still have to bring it to us. It's those days. It's not the weapon. So regardless of what means you use to harvest the deer, if that deer is harvested in that time frame, you have to bring it to us.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll definitely add that. I mean, we want those freezers full. That's only going to help. So that's a big thing. If you're wanting to help and kill a deer outside of those check stations, put that head in the freezer for us. We'll get you a test, and it also increases, Gabe wanted to, cast that wide net. That just gets us more samples. So.
John, did you pull up that result?
Yeah, I'll share
I
it here
think you
real
had it up
quick.
there for just a second.
And so Ben gave us his tag number from 2020. He probably put one in the freezer there down the road from your office, didn't you?
Yeah, pulled one,
Yeah.
put it in the freezer here, Casey.
There you go. So, select what year it's from. If you've got one from last year you haven't looked up, and just hit that submit button. And what you're going to see, this is the main thing over here, the not detected. That's a clean test. And that's basically what you look for. It'll have some info on that deer, basically what you provided us on the deer head when you turned it in on the freezer card that goes with it. And so that's what you're looking for. Pretty simple. That's linked off our CWD page, and pretty simple process to get it to, check on your results.
And I will comment on that. One thing I did like was the fact that, y'all go ahead and give an age from the jaws. So, I mean, that kind of helps you out a little bit in kind of seeing how your herd age is. You can kind of judge some of your other animals based off of that one, especially if they're a buck.
Yeah, and that's kind of another good incentive for using a freezer or coming by our check stations is you'll get a pretty good age. You get up there, those 5 or 6 year old, monster deer, it's a little more subjective, but for sure, we'll nail it down 2, 3, sometimes 4 for you there while you're at the check station.
All right, Matt, I saw you putting some stuff in the chat.
Yeah, real quick. I just want to raise folks' awareness. We threw together a couple fact sheets relative to CWD within the extension system. So if folks are interested in any of those, we've got 3 fact sheets that we put together. Probably the one that's a little bit different than what Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife has currently is a fact sheet on processing deer in the CWD zone, surveillance zone, and some tips on how to do that. And if you want to have some extra precaution or have any concerns relative to CWD and processing your meat. This is one that unfortunately, if we do detect CWD in the future, this is one that is going to come in handy. And there's basic stuff, try to limit any kind of cutting into the spinal cord or any other areas that would have higher concentrations of the prion, and doing things like cleaning your knives in a 40% bleach solution instead of normal cleaning procedures for your equipment for working up your deer. Those can all be found through our college extension page, but specifically they're at our Department of Forestry and Natural Resource extension page under wildlife publications. They're here, the top 3 listed right there. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out directly to me and I can put you in touch with them. The best way to do that is my email, Matt Springer, MATTSPRINGER @uky.edu. With that, I don't know, does anybody, I think we've gotten through all the questions I've seen. If there's nothing else from folks, and Ben, I don't know I think you've run through quite a few. If you're good.
I did put one YouTube clip in there. It was actually one off of Fish and Wildlife's YouTube page. It was the DIY deer processing field to freezer that they talked about the field dressing, but then also, if I remember correctly, yeah, that's the IR plus one. Had the video as well from Dr. Renfro that talked about processing as well and talked about breaking down cuts. It was really good with that.
Yep, he's a great resource as well, especially in terms of the processing part. Well, outside of that, I'm not seeing any more questions. And for the sake of time, I don't necessarily want to keep Gabe and John too much longer. They've got a long couple of weeks of collecting samples coming up here, unfortunately for them. And hopefully you all fail miserably at detecting it. That's with my fingers crossed.
That's what we all hope.
Yeah. So, guys, I really appreciate you all taking your time to do this, and look forward and do really appreciate the partnership that you have with our extension offices and the folks here. Is there contact information if they need to reach out or if they want to get a hold of y'all that works best?
Yeah, let me, I've got it here. Let me pull that up, Matt, if you want.
Yeah, that'd probably be best for the recording.
Yep. There's our contact info for both John and myself, email and phone number.
All right. Well, guys, I appreciate it, and thanks for all the information and getting it out there, and for all the work you do to make sure that we have this resource now and in the future. Hopefully, it stays as healthy as possible. Anything else?
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks,
Good deal.
guys.
Appreciate
Appreciate
it.
you having us on.
Yep.
Yeah, you
Go
guys
shoot
have-
some deer.
Yes, especially out there.
Yep.
You guys have a great rest of your night.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
y'all.